Welcome to Time for Hope. Today our guest is Ace Collins, and we're talking about his newest book, Stories Behind the Great Traditions of Christmas. The traditions of Christmas lend beauty, awe, and hope to the holiday, causing people all over the world to anticipate it with joy. The stories of this book will warm your heart as you rediscover the true and eternal significance of Christmas. And Ace, it's wonderful having you back on Time for Hope.
What a joy to be here again at Christmas. I so enjoyed last year, and I'm honored that you would have me back again this year.
And I said it was your newest book because you are an author of over 50 books, I understand.
We're doing number 60 right now, and so you just keep turning them out because you love it, I guess. I love the research. You and I talked about that off camera, to find the stories behind things, to find out the true meanings of elements of history, to find out why they're significant in our life. I think that's what drives me as much as anything else. And I have seen the payback in that with letters I've gotten from people who appreciate something, or it's changed their lives, or it's impacted them in a very special way. I know the last time we were on the show, we talked about the stories behind Christmas songs, and we told the story of one song, and I had a lady who met me and emailed me and introduced me to her children, who told me that she now knew, because of listening to that song, that her children would always think of her at Christmas that way, and she died of cancer, and yet these three children will remember her because of something that we had an opportunity to talk about on the show, and that's pretty remarkable.
You do great research, and I know that you have a passion for it. I can tell that from reading your books, and I think it's so great that you can go and bring history and bring us up to date on so many of these subjects that we take for granted and don't have the slightest idea what's behind it. And I want to jump right into what we're talking about, and that is Christmas and the traditions of Christmas. But I want to go back where you actually began, when it was not a Christian holiday. It literally was a heathen holiday.
Well, Christmas, December 25th, that area of the time in old days, in pre-Christ days, was worshipped as the end of the long cold winter. It's when days started to get longer. So they worshiped the sun god. In some cases it was Saturn, in other societies it was other names, but it was a time when people got together and worshiped and really partied as much as anything else, because the long, hard, cold winter was over. You and I have talked. Christ was not born on December 25th. The shepherds wouldn't have been in the fields. The flocks would have been locked up behind fences. It had to happen in either the spring or the fall, probably. But December 25th became the holiday that was chosen for Christ's birth, and really wasn't designated until the 300s, 300 years after he died. It was chosen by the church in Constantinople, the leader of Rome, to attempt to quiet the pagan celebrations that were going on, to attempt to inject some civility and some spirituality in what was a very unspiritual time. Ironically enough, for much of our time, that didn't happen. Christ's birth was embraced not with a religious posture, but it was embraced much like the heathen holidays that worship the sun. And we find that shocking, because we think of old-fashioned Christmas as very worshipful times. More often than not, they were anything but worshipful times. The establishing of a day for Christmas did not immediately establish Christmas as a holiday of worship.
It's very interesting when we think also, and you brought that out in your introduction, that the birth of Christ was not even celebrated, even by Christians, the birth, at least 125 years after he was born. They looked more to his death and his resurrection.
The resurrection was the key part, and that's what Christ's life was all about. Hence, the birth to them was not significant. It was what he taught when he was an adult, what he stood for, how he died, and the mere fact that he rose up and saved people from their sins. That was his whole life. Hence, the birth of the baby Jesus was not an event that really carried a great deal of significance for the early church.
Now, Ace, there are going to be some of our viewers watching this show, and they're immediately going to think, well, we shouldn't be using a heathen holiday and try to make that into a Christian holiday. They feel that there's something wrong with that, but it hasn't been unusual through the history of the church.
The church has adopted many things, and if you think about it, in a missionary sense, it's worthwhile, because you go in to win people's souls. You don't go in to change cultures. You know, you win people's souls, and then they'll change themselves. And when you go in and speak the language in a hinterland of Africa, you embrace what the Maasai people are thinking. And it's very much the same way with Christian missionaries at the time. They found talents, they found traditions in cultures where they were reaching out and saving souls, and incorporated things like the Yule log or mistletoe or those kind of things, and gave them Christian significance. And thereby they became learning tools where one could actually grow in the faith. And I think they became very significant. And I think that's why they're an important part of Christmas today, is each one of them represents a facet that we can embrace as Christian life, kind of like parables that Christ told in a way.
It's kind of like going with the flow. You can't fight it and get anywhere, so why not kind of go with it, and we get significance out of it, and maybe take away some of the heathen activity that goes along with it.
And in many cases we've taken away all of the heathen activity, and it's become purely a Christian tradition. And many of the things that we embrace, we may be shocked at their beginnings, but what glorious, glorious things they stand for now.
And in a way, we're impacting the world with Christ's kingdom when we do that.
And I think that's the most exciting part, because particularly children can learn so much from these traditions, and it makes coming to Christ so much easier.
We're going to get into them. Time for a break. Stay with us, and we'll be right back. It's good to have you rejoin us on Time for Hope as we talk with Ace Collins about his book, Stories Behind the Great Traditions of Christmas. But I want to share something from a viewer first. The Holy Spirit is working through your show in mighty ways. Your programs seem to address current issues that I am dealing with at that time. I am so glad I found Time for Hope. May the Lord continually guide and provide for all your needs in your ministry as well as your personal life. And I appreciate that note of encouragement. The whole staff appreciates notes like that. And if you haven't sent along your note telling us how much Time for Hope means to you, we would invite you to do so. At the same time, we would invite you to share your prayer requests with us. Again, I remind you that we take each and every prayer request that comes into Time for Hope individually and personally before God, knowing that there is hope, there is help, and that there is intervention. And another note I would add, we can always use your financial help. Ace, that was a great encouragement. And you know, being in ministry and hosting radio and that sort of stuff, it's like a shot in the arm, isn't it?
When you hear what people want to see or listen to. It does encourage you, and it really drives what you do, and therefore you can have a greater impact in life. So people writing you, I'm sure, is one of the most important tools you have in your ministry.
And I appreciate that you're sharing that as a fellow co-host in ministry. Now, just within the last 200 years, has Christmas been accepted as a Christian holiday? Now, the Puritans didn't like it at all, did they?
They outlawed it. They outlawed it. And if
Okay.
you lived in a Puritan section of, I remember when Oliver Cromwell came to power in England, that was one of his first acts, was to outlaw Christmas. People say, why? And it was a violent holiday. It was a holiday of drinking. It was like Mardi Gras on steroids. I mean, it was just an incredibly violent time. Women and children were not safe on the streets in England or America during the celebration of Christmas. There's an old Christmas carol, "We Wish You a Merry Christmas," and there's a part of that carol that says, "We won't leave until we get some." These people in these roaming violent bands actually banged on people's doors demanding food and drink and other things. It was not a time when children would go out onto the streets. It certainly wasn't a time for women. Hence, the New York City police force was formed to combat the violence that took place on Christmas Day. So it was anything but a religious holiday. It was a holiday of great sinning, I guess you would say. And the only place, now Eastern Europe and Germany and places like that, it was a reverent holiday. But in the Anglo-Saxon world that we know, the America, the United States, it was not a wonderful holiday really until about 1840s, 1850s. So people don't want an old-fashioned Christmas in that sense.
We've come a long ways then.
Yes, we have.
And we would have to give that credit, as it were, to the pioneer Christians that were very active in trying to turn it around. And I would think, instead of, you know, we complain so often that we forget the reason for the season, but when you have that dark background, we've actually come a long ways in remembering the reason for the season.
We have come a long way. Realize that in the first 70 years of the United States, Congress met on Christmas Day unless it fell on Sunday. Protestant churches were not open on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve unless it was Sunday in the first years of American worship. Things began to change as, I think, children became more significant part of Christmas. And part of that we owe to things that we hate sometimes as Christian, and that's the night before Christmas. The poem suddenly emphasized the Christmas part of children part of Christmas. Then you have things like Charles Dickens, who was writing this Christmas carol. He was writing about Scrooge as much as anything else, and a social commentary on how depressed life was for the working class in the industrial age, the Industrial Revolution. Yet, by talking about the significance of giving, the significance of generosity, the significance of helping your fellow man, and recognize the importance of each individual who worked for you, he started to get people to think about what Christmas was all about. And I think the turning point for Christmas as a holiday of worship and a holiday of family probably was when Prince Albert married Queen Victoria, because Albert was from Germany and he brought to England the traditions that are so symbolic and significant in our lives today, be it a Christmas tree, be it the family getting together, be it children as a part of Christmas, getting together and doing things as a family, and also the worship part that Martin Luther had instilled in the Germans was so important as a part of Christmas. So really, the Christmas that we love, the Christmas that means so much to us, really began about 1840, 1845.
All right, let's pick up right on that thought in thinking of some current things that are so much a part of especially Americans celebrating Christmas, like Christmas cards. That's relatively recent, isn't it?
Christmas cards, obviously, two things had to happen. One, you had to have what we just talked about, Christmas becoming a holiday of family. And two, you had to have a cheap printing operation. And three, you had to have a reliable postal service. Well, what happened was Sir Henry Cole from England in the 1840s would get letters at Christmas, and it was really impolite not to answer mail. And yet he was so busy with his 5 or 6 different jobs. He was a curator of a museum. He was a very important part of the government in England, that he didn't have time to answer them. And he remembered as a child he drew Christmas drawings for school. And he actually had an artist draw a scene of a Victorian family around the table at Christmas. He sent that out in 1843 to 1,000 of his friends. And what happened is that began the tradition of the Christmas card, which spread to the United States about 1865, 1870. And it was very, very significant over the years, really about 1900s, when they had really a lot of religious symbolism in them. Before that, they were just kind of generic greetings.
Well, we're coming up on another break, and we want to get back into some of these traditions when we return. Stay with us, and we'll be right back. It has taken centuries to pool the combinations of secular and religious celebrations and traditions together so that we have what we know and celebrate today as Christmas. There are those who try to detach themselves from observing it altogether, believing it to be a heathen holiday with only the trappings of a Christian celebration. Others do their best to keep their focus on the reason for the season, believing it to be celebrating the miraculous birth of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, coming into the world to redeem His people from their sin. And we will find others merely going along for all the fun, parties, gifts, and other festivities connected to the biggest and brightest holiday of the year. Referring to those who attempt to detach themselves from observing Christmas, we must conclude that it is impossible to do this entirely unless you can tell the world to stop so that you can get off and catch it again after the first of the year. If you fit into the camp of remembering the reason for the season, you will have a difficult time dissecting mere tradition and other activities out so that you can remain centered on the birth of the Christ child. And if you are found in the largest crowd, those who simply go along for the fun and festivities, plus the excuse to indulge in behaviors usually deemed unacceptable, you will end up the loser for not having listened to the story of a Savior who was born over 2,000 years ago in Bethlehem in Judea. The baby Jesus was indeed the Son of God. He was born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, died on an old rugged cross, was buried in a borrowed tomb, arose again on the third day, and now sits at the right hand of His Father, interceding for people like you. Why not make this Christmas really special by heeding the voice of the Christ child, now all grown up and back in heaven with His Father, who says, "Be earnest and repent." That is, change your mind about Him and your sinful behavior. Here I am, I stand at the door, of course, of your heart, and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. Welcome back to Time for Hope. We're talking with Ace Collins about his book, Stories Behind the Great Traditions of Christmas. Ace, when I think of Christmas, I think of memories, and you keep stressing family and times together. And my memories of Christmas go way back to my grandparents and all my uncles and aunts, and it being a wonderful time of the year. Actually, our uncles would start early in putting on a Santa Claus face and coming out and scaring us when we were very young in our grandparents' home. But you think of food, you think of family, you think of having, just a good time of fellowship and fun, even with extended family. So when did that all start happening?
I really think that in Germany and Austria and those places, that happened probably in the 13, 14, and 1500s. I mean, Luther obviously did it. He stressed it in his congregation. He was the one who gave us lights on the Christmas tree, with the candles, and created, I guess, the first fire hazard at Christmas too, doing that. But in the United States, really, it goes back to probably about the 1850s, 60s. The last 150 years in the United States and England is when family became a significant part of a Christmas celebration, when it became worshipful in that respect. Yet there are elements of Christmas, such as Advent, that go back clear to the beginnings of the church. Really, Advent's 1,500 years old now, and people have kind of lost what Advent means.
And now, was that immediately Advent connected with Christmas and
it was when the church began to
yes?
celebrate Christmas in earnest, which is about 500-600 AD, when it really became an important facet of worship. In particular the Catholic Church, Advent was brought up as a way of looking forward to the coming of Christmas. And we've talked about in the past the three comings. And that's what Advent was all about. You were supposed to think of the coming of the baby Jesus, so the coming of the birth of Christ. You were talking about the coming of Christ in your life and the coming of the second rule of Christ, the second coming. Those were the three comings you look forward to. And it was set out as the month before Christmas to look at the three meanings of Christ's life: the present, the past, and the future. And the present, of course, being the most important, really, in some ways, because that's Christ in your life and how you reflect life. That's what Advent was. And it grew really from the Norsemen making Advent wreaths, and that was symbolic of evergreen being the only tree that could last in tough times, to the candle being added for the light of Christ, then other candles being added for the various symbols of the time, the red candle being for the death on the cross. And so Advent is very significant. Now we think of it with candles, we think of it with calendars, we think it with wreaths. But I love the fact, when I did the research, that it's a holiday that celebrates the coming of Christ in three ways, particularly the coming of Christ in your own life.
That's the gospel, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
That he was born the Son of God. He was the Son of God who became the Son of Man, that sons of men might become sons of God. I love it, and it's all wrapped in there. And our hope today is his second return to set up his kingdom.
And wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone had that coming experience as they look forward to Christmas?
Yes, and perhaps when they reflect on his birth, and if it's put out in a way that we're talking about, it could cause them to want that personal relationship with this Son of God. Let's look at some other things that most of us think of when we think of Christmas, and that's poinsettias. How did we get poinsettias connected?
The only
with
real
Christmas?
American tradition is poinsettias, and they came from Mexico. And once again, it goes back, they were originally pagan, used by the Aztecs as part of sacrifice and worship. It was embraced by a very shrewd missionary, a Catholic missionary, who used the poinsettia as a plant that bloomed, and actually the red are leaves, they're not flowers, but as bloomed in the wintertime to represent the birth of Christ. There's a wonderful legend in the book about it that is a legend. It's not true, but it really is a wonderful story to show children about the power of giving, and it's a part of Christmas as well. But that's our American tradition.
We can claim that, huh?
We'll
tease them out with that and move on to the whole idea of using an X with Christmas, Xmas. I know there are those that are anti-Xmas because they think we're taking Christ out of it, but literally it's putting Christ into it.
It is one of the oldest Christmas, oldest Christian traditions that goes with Christmas and goes with life of Christ, because X was the first letter in Christ's name in the Greek alphabet, Chi. Many, many people in the Middle Ages, for instance, could not read or write, but they could recognize that X. And so a lot of the church text had X standing for Christ. If you read a lot of the old Catholic documents, it's Xmas rather than Christmas. And it's done that way as a way, one, to save ink, because ink was very expensive, but also a way so that people who could not read, who were illiterate, could do that. You could actually ask people, tell me what your faith is. And they could pick up a pen or a pencil. Even if they couldn't read or write, they could put the X, and the X stood for Christ. In the old church, when Christians were martyred and they fell on the ground, they would actually put an X on that spot. For X marks the spot where this person gave their life for Christ. We think of it now as taking Christ out of Christmas. The early church would have thought Xmas was the ultimate in putting Christ into Christmas, because the X was their symbol for Christ. So we can turn that around in a modern time too, to mean something very significant for all of us.
Well, you've got so many more in your book, and of course I encourage our viewers to get a copy of your book. We've simply teased them out. They can find out about Handel's Messiah and how, first of all, it was an Easter celebration and used for Easter rather than Christmas, and how it came to fit into Christmas.
Trees, ornaments, gifts, they're all in there, and it's a wonderful celebration of Christmas to find out how all of this started.
Isn't this beautiful, Ace? Thank you so much for coming on.
As always, thank you for having me here.
And it's good having you on Time for Hope, and we look forward to your joining us again next week.
A free fact sheet that contains additional information about today's topic is available upon request from our ministry. You can also receive a copy of today's resource for $15 plus $3 shipping and handling. To receive the free fact sheet or our guest's book or both, you may call us at 1-800-669-9133. Write us at Post Office Box 2169, Spartanburg, South Carolina 29304. Or visit our website at timeforhope.org. When you call or write, please prayerfully consider a donation to our ministry. Our ministry's mission is to offer hope to discouraged and hurting people. As we continue to give out messages of hope, you can become a member of our team by sending us a financial gift of any amount. When you send your gift to support Time for Hope, you are joining us in offering hope to many viewers who might believe there is no hope for their situation. And you're also enabling us to inform and inspire some viewers to expand our mission as they learn and in turn can minister more effectively to hurting people around them. To see this program again online, go to our website or find us on YouTube. Join us next week on Time for Hope as Dr. Cruz discusses another insightful topic. Until next time, have a great week, and remember, it is time for hope.